Hi, and welcome back to the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc. Today, we're happy to welcome Siim, founder and general partner of Lemonade Stand. After 20 years of growing products in a number of startups, most notably at Skype, in Tallinn, London, and Berlin, Siim set up Lemonade Stand in 2019 to invest in early-stage Baltic and Eastern European startup. Lately, he's been looking for AI and machine learning applied to boring business problems. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the follow button, giving us a review, and following the European VC on LinkedIn.
Siim, welcome to the European VC podcast. Super nice to have you today. How's everything on your side?
Hello. It's good. It's kind of springy winter in Tallinn, Estonia.
Yeah, that's how I would describe it in Denmark as well.
Yeah, that's also how I would describe it in Portugal, actually. We've been out with some bad weather these days. Anyways, Siim, let's start with the basics maybe. I feel like some people might not know that much about you. And so maybe it would be nice to give some time for us to kind of just give a quick rundown of who you are, what you've been up to, but also what you're doing now. And I love the name, but I won't reveal it yet.
For sure. So I've been practicing this part. Before I started building Lemonade Stand, which is the name of the fund that we're investing from, I spent about 20 years building startups. Skype is probably the name that people have heard. Joined that when it was 50 people globally. I left when Microsoft bought it and it was 900 people. And I mean, 900 today in a light of the Facebooks and whatever. It feels very small, but it was a huge, we're going from a startup to part of a big corporation, especially because eBay bought it first and then spun it out again and so forth. And then went back to very small startups, 5-6 people bands here in Tallinn, but then quickly I was invited to go to London by Eileen from Passion Capital. I spent a few years working with their portfolio companies. And then some old buddies invited me to go to Berlin, spent 5-6 years there. And then kind of COVID drove me back home. And while in Berlin, I started investing with a more systematic approach and branded this as Lemonade Stand. And now I've been doing this for the last 4 years. And my background, what I was doing in the startups was basically like marketing and growth, B2B software was kind of.
And the question that everyone's jumping over each other to ask is, why the fuck did you call it Lemonade Stand?
Well, I had to put my marketing hat on, how to stand out in a sea of companies that go by the names of capital and venture and
you're showcasing your skills with a Lemonade Stand as a name.
Yeah, but also I was looking for something that would tie myself and my partner together. And I think Lemonade Stand is the archetypical first business that kids do in Hollywood movies. We were starting out, we're helping founders who just start out, so it made sense. And it gives us a nice punchy yellow color as well. Which I'm not wearing.
Which you're not wearing. For anyone not watching, only listening, because we don't have video, Siim is wearing an all black turtleneck, right? So correct. Completely unrelated. Andreas, go on.
No, I was only about to say that your website is very, very yellow. So let's dive into the color yellow. No, I like the whole idea and your whole thinking around it. But tell us a bit more about Lemonade Stand. Tell us about your investment thesis, your strategy, and all that.
Sure. The setup is a solo GP family office type fund, which gives me a lot of freedom. But I've set up arbitrary rules just to give us a little more focus. And the elevator pitch is that Lemonade Stand is a pre-seed and seed stage fund focused on Baltic and East European founders. We're looking for B2B software predominantly and sort of average ticket size around 150K, which means that we're never the lead investor. Also in the sort of pre-seed round, I might give quite a bit of advice how to pull the round together and so forth. But we're very collaborative here, both with the regional, local investors and business angels as well, but also from London, Berlin, and so forth. And we started out as a very agnostic fund and have since then narrowed the focus a little bit. And recently, I've been called sort of impact tilted. Whatever that means, it doesn't mean that we only invest in sustainability, but my kind of favorite lens to look at things are is there an interesting machine learning application used in the company, and does it also somehow cross with sustainability future? And a couple of examples here. Since I've limited myself from hardware investments, how can I get the closest to the atoms as possible? So a recent investment is a Polish startup that is helping farmers to get to vaccine candidates faster by using machine learning. Or the latest investment is a Lithuanian startup called Biomatter, where they are using machine learning to generate new proteins, which are then licensed out to chemical farmers and so forth. Kind of, are there any second order benefits to the investment that I'm making? If it's yet another SMB lending platform, like maybe that's not.
And now, just before we started recording, we talked about why should anyone listen to this podcast episode. So, Siim, you told us you had a great answer to this. So now the onus is on you to live up to that.
I was trying to figure out what's the angle, and I think it's the unfiltered view from the Baltics. You don't get many visitors from this corner of the world, and because we don't have an LPs, maybe I can be more candid about certain things. I don't please or save. Make sure that I still have the LPs in the next round. Although maybe there's a next round, who knows? But yeah, maybe that's kind of the view that I'm bringing.
So much to unpack in those small details in that sentence. but I think why, before going into what's next for Lemonade Stand and some really interesting topics that I had kind of earmarked here, why don't we start with what you just said? Give us the unfiltered view of the region. I'm not there. I don't know it very well. I think I've never been there physically. What should I know about it as someone who's investing in venture, whether that's as an LP, a VC, or an angel?
To give a little broad context, last year, and I want to talk about Baltics. So Estonia, in terms of startups, is, if we have to put it on a scale, like Estonia is 100, Lithuania is 60, and Latvia is 30. So they're catching up. There's lower volume of startups coming out of there. Maybe the quality isn't there.
I'm sure that statement won't get you into trouble.
I'm willing to go on stage and debate that with anyone who wants to. Yeah, and it's about the density of the ecosystem here. Estonia has had a few more sort of generation, let's say. If Skype and Playtech are generation one, they obviously people started peeling out of there, setting up new startups like Pipedrive, Wise, and so forth. And people like myself started funding their next startups, and some very well-known names are the more sort of local angels. And that's starting to happen in Lithuania as well, and to an extent in Latvia, but there hasn't been this several layers of generations. And obviously, with the generations, you start building up some muscle. So initially, it's development and product side, and then you get into sales and marketing and how to scale faster across the world. So Estonia just has a few years advantage there, but I feel because the Lithuanian market, both for talent and just overall population, is bigger, ultimately, as with everything else, they will overtake us. And I've been spending more time getting to know the ecosystem there. It has a handful of local VCs. Most of them are not just focused on one country or even the Baltics. They're looking beyond that, either to Nordics or Eastern Europe. So the pool here for quality deals isn't super high, and I think especially now after the summer last year, the volume has gone down, and that's the comment I've heard from everyone in the region, but also from Western Europe side. So we kind of live and breathe in a very similar style as others.
I have a question, which is the Baltics seem to be kind of the place that both Nordic VCs go to and Eastern European VCs go to. And I'm a bit curious to hear your take on that. Do you see a difference in the Nordic VCs that come to the Baltics and the approach that the Eastern European VCs come with? I'm just curious because it's the one overlapping region that I kind of see both parties kind of expanding towards.
You're right. So both have interest here. I think both have some sort of reputation. From the Nordics, for example, Icebreaker is super active here, but also like big funds like Random and Inventure and so forth. And from the Baltics, I guess the Polish VCs have been the most active. For a while with the Polish VCs, I think the reputation was that there's probably state money in the fund, so you need to establish an office or something in Poland. And that wasn't in everyone's books. They didn't want to do that. But ultimately, depending on the market situation, you maybe can't choose who your investor is that well. Not ideal, but such is life, right? But I think for the ecosystem here, that's been super good because we have the regional, we have the Nordics, we have the East European, and then obviously you have like London and Berlin and Paris guys paying attention. So there's a bit more choice and more competition for the good founders. So all in all, I think it's very beneficial. And last year, for sure, I think maybe it was the wave before, after the pandemic, but every week there was some VC in town like, hey, who are the good founders I should meet? And who are the local investors and angels who can be my scouts and so forth, which kind of exciting to see.
Now, in the Baltics, just because I'm seeing right now that might be because the calendar says February and everyone's planning their event year. But it seems like everyone's asking, so where should I go this year? What are the tech events that we should be going to? Curious to hear your take on the Baltics. What events are there that people should put on their map?
So there are two and a half events you should come to. One is, I think it's I don't want to say it, just Google it. It's Tech in Riga. So you say like Latvia is catching up when it comes to the ecosystem, but the event there is very good. 2,500 people, kind of small enough but big enough. Get a good mix of founders, investors. In Tallinn, Latitude 59, that's the biggest regional thing. I mean, you step up from there to Slush, and that's like 10 times bigger to Latitude. And then in Riga, there's Startup Fair. In Vilnius, in Lithuania. The Startup Fair, that was slightly smaller, maybe more local. But even then, you had some like Danish funds and Turkish funds and myself there. So I think they have the
Turkish fund.
A few Turkish funds have been looking around in the Baltics for a while. Yeah, there's a few others who are paying attention to the region.
Ennis and his henchmen are everywhere.
Yeah, of course. He's here, yeah, for sure.
I actually want to ask, investors that you name from the region, who would you highlight? Not asking you to name favorites, but I kind of am.
Yeah. Again, in Estonia, I think that in my stage, the guys I collaborate most with, both in terms of sharing deals, but also doing deals, are Change Ventures, Super Angel, Specialist VC, Terra VC, and then when you go sort of late seed A round, and Karma, Nord Ninja. And in Lithuania, Practica, for example, they now have two new early stage funds called First Pick and Baltic Sandbox that is focused on deep tech. Probably forgot a few here. Sorry, guys. And yeah, a few family offices are kind of active as well. Honey Badger, which is set up by three Pipedrive founders, is quite active. And in Lithuania, there are a couple of super angels who are doing fairly like high volume and high ticket deals as well.
I'm curious because, as you just said a bit earlier, you are kind of a hybrid between a solo GP and a family office. And I'm always curious to understand family office motivations and how you think about both, going direct and going into funds, because you've obviously opted for the route of going direct, but have you also done LP investments?
What the motivation was, I was in the startup world and my partner was in like energy sector background. And I think he was at the local conferences here on stage, and after him, there was some local startups talking. So, and whenever we would meet, I would tell him about my world, and he would ask him questions about his world. And then one point, friends of ours came and said, hey, we have this startup. Why don't you guys fund us? And after some discussion, we said, one investment probably doesn't make any sense. We should probably build a portfolio. That was kind of the story, because we were just immersed in this.
You build a portfolio to make the one investment that you have to do into your friend's company make sense. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's a write-off.
That's the story, anyways. And then it made also sense that I would take my experience occasionally helping founders. So I was never a founder myself, but I was quite often the first employee or something like that, help founders with the fundraising, the decks, and the pitch practice, and so forth. Take that experience and put it into a fund. And we never sort of discussed in the beginning, should we take external money, because we wanted the flexibility and especially give ourselves time in the beginning to just learn. And now occasionally other angels approach us, sort of, guys, are you taking money into the fund? Because I don't want to deal with due diligence anymore, making decisions. And I think I've been doing this long enough. Lemon Stand has been doing this long enough that also fund of funds start approaching us and with the same questions. The Estonian government has made a few calls for like sustainability fund and deep tech fund. And everyone's asking me, hey, are you guys applying as well? And so far the answer is still no. But at the same time, of course, I'm thinking like, what's the next 10, 20 years for Lemonade Stand? I still think in terms of funds. So we're on to our second fund right now. And once I finish investing from this one, what's next? So it's a topic we discuss on a regular basis, but for now, stay the course.
I'm going to interrupt you there, Siim, and we'll come back to this topic just because you said something. And again, it goes back to the previous topic of the region, right? So the government put out a lot of calls. Are you guys going to apply? Well, the answer is still no, right? I've seen, and this is not specific to the Baltics, so this is specific to Europe, many of these programs actually like being really kind of complex and coming with a lot of strings attached. You gave an example talking about Polish investors, meaning that means specific things for the starters, blah, blah. So you've also seen it, I'm sure. How would you describe these programs in the Baltics? Are they hindering more than helping? Are they kind of getting there? What would you say to that comment?
I can't comment on the Lithuanian market. You have to invite someone from First Pick or Baltic Sandbox, I think. But they weren't complaining, though it was such a tricky process. For the Estonian ones, there's sort of late stages now with SmartCap is putting like 40 million into sustainability funds. And there, I have to say the process has been very sensible. And maybe also because, again, the ecosystem is fairly mature, so there's a lot of knowledge. But also they did a quite inclusive sort of run up to the actual call where they were consulting founders and investors. Where are the gaps? Where should they focus on? What should be the rules and so forth? So I think that was very sensible. And what I know in Lithuania, there's a very pro-investor scheme where there's a state entity that is co-investing with business angels and VCs, and they are only looking for 6% return. So any return above that gets split between the investors that were in that round. So I know that with Interactio, for example, that did a big A round where a lot of the early investors got out with a secondary, and they got like huge X because of that scheme. There's a little bit of bureaucracy involved, but nothing too arduous.
And now back to, you were saying something that when I interpreted that, I find extremely interesting, which is, you know, even though you have your setup, which is this family office like fund, you know, I think it's like 3 LPs or whatever, last time we spoke, you do think of it of batches of 5 million. So you do think of it as almost like micro funds, right? So I'd love to have you kind of expand on that. Why do you operate it like that, right? And what's the reasoning behind it? And just give us the details so everyone understands.
I think I just wanted or needed some discipline to myself, both in terms of like how do we think, or how do I think about follow-on investments, first tickets, follow-on tickets, or any follow-ons at all, portfolio diversification between sectors and startups and so forth. And then ultimately, in a few cases, we decided that we don't know enough about the sector, but we want to invest into this, future of food being one of them. So back to Andreas's question earlier, yes, we became an LP in, I think now it's 3 funds and 1 accelerator, just to give us this diversification. In one case, like geography, in another case, sector, and the accelerator is like early stage sustainability investing, but they do quite a lot of like hardware and material science as well, where I don't have the deal flow, the expertise, or the network to assess those. So we're kind of bringing in extra diversification through this.
You said one thing that I found super interesting when we first chatted, which was about your LP investments as well. And I'm speaking out of my memory and some loose notes I have. So help me frame it correctly. But it was something around also doing an LP ticket into, you know, a US based fund to also have data points from the US. And if I remember correctly, you said something like, I do that so I'm sure I'm not seeing shit deals. Right? Yeah. But I'd love to hear you talk a bit about that and what that learning as well has been from having those data points.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the same lesson I'm trying to tell my founders, that you need to see enough of something to know what is good, what good looks like. So the US fund we invested in is called Tiny Seed. It's also a smaller 20 million size fund, and they're B2B SaaS experts. They're looking for bootstrap founders who have gotten to certain traction and then want to take maybe only just 1 round of financing to get to a different growth trajectory. And what I like about them is that we get access to dashboard with everyone's revenue metrics. So I can start looking at, okay, who's growing faster than the others? What are they doing? What they're doing on the marketing side, pricing side, and product side. If I want to, I can talk to the CEO and so forth. And that obviously gives me more sort of benchmarking information when I look around in the region where I'm making direct investments. So that's been very interesting. Yeah, not just diversifying my bets, but also...
I'm actually curious to continue that vein a bit, because this is what we always say towards angels, that and I even had this conversation with Michael Sitchmore from Alt Goes Mainstream the other day, where he said, well, it's kind of like we're doing it backwards, right? Because most people start doing direct and then they do LP tickets later on, where you would kind of think that you would go the other way around. Then you do LP tickets first, then you learn the ropes by co-investing with these funds and looking over their shoulder, seeing how they think about things, and then you'd start going direct. But it's kind of like we're seeing angels doing the opposite. And exactly because of that argument, Dave and I usually say, well, most angels would really benefit from doing a couple of LP tickets, either via a syndicate like ours, because they don't want to do the full ticket, or they do it directly for that express learning, right? But you actually, I'd say, almost took it to the next level, right? Because you are practically a VC fund. At least you act very much like one. At the same time as you then did an LP ticket to also say, okay, I'm looking over these guys' shoulder and I'm learning and I'm seeing kind of how they think about things. And I'm curious to hear, do you think that that's the best practice approach for most emerging managers to get that exposure via LP investments?
It's a good question. So my very first angel tickets were still directly while I was back in London, super like without any thoughts. I had some information asymmetry. I just like followed some other investors into deal. It's still working out, so I haven't had an exit from there. When I was started considering these LP tickets, then we here with a bunch of other people asked Sten and Tavet for advice because they had been doing this for a while. And Sten kind of said something that I still keep in my brain. Is like, with funds, it's even longer cycle for the learnings. So yes, if it's good fund, they're sharing a lot of information, like especially if we get access to dashboards like this, there's accelerated learnings. But I think that may be rare. And I don't have enough data points because I haven't invested in 20 funds. I don't know how many give how much detailed information on the metrics and so forth to really educate me as an investor. And then going, okay, now I know what's a good investment.
You have to optimize for that. When you pick the fund, you have to make sure that you're picking a fund that will work with you like that, because otherwise it's just, then it's just money put in a place where you'll get a report every 3 months.
Yeah. Exactly right. And possibly the minimum ticket is high enough. So as an angel, you can maybe start participating through like business angel network with 5K tickets and build up a portfolio like that. But with funds, it's 100, 200 to 150K, quite often the minimum.
Yeah, super interesting. Super interesting. How about when you then have built your own dashboard? Have you built to manage your own investments? Have you really found a lot of inspiration in that, or have you gone another route?
So when it comes to my portfolio, not everything is B2B SaaS. So not everyone has like recurring monthly revenue where you can very easily compare. Some are pre-revenue where it's more about validating the idea, finding the first customers. Some are very R&D heavy. So we know that when they were fundraising, they said back in 2021 that the first revenues we'll have in 2023. It's like, okay, that's a different investment. I need to think about this. But and others obviously are B2B SaaS. So it's not all apples to apples. But when it is a B2B SaaS or even like an enterprise thing, yes, I can start drawing parallels. Like maybe 2% month-to-month growth isn't good enough.
Okay, so now we are about the place where we can talk about your future. Let's dive into it because as you said, you started this with the preamble. I am being more and more often approached by super angels in the neighborhood and also even some fund of funds saying, what are you going to do, Siim? So tell us what's on your mind these days.
So there's a couple of things there. As I said, we've had the flexibility to really decide what we do. Like LP tickets are a very good example, but also in terms of shifting around in the sectors. I think I started out with more traditional B2B SaaS because that was kind of my background. I understood that a bit better. But then found every now and then sort of going outside of the normal parameters. So for example, in Berif, we invest in the post-A round, which is not the typical ticket, or made investment in a company that is turning discarded lamb's wool into packaging material to get rid of plastic. So all of a sudden it's material and manufacturing also like an exception. But felt very strongly that this idea deserves to get to the next phase, and they did. And also 2 years ago, I said like, oh, space tech, that's not what we're looking at, and quantum computers. And now I have 3 space tech startups in my portfolio. So I think if I go to like fund of funds with this talk that, okay, we're doing this right now, but maybe we sort of do something completely different, not completely different, but we shift around a lot, then that might not work for them. It might work for angel tickets. So I think that's something where I need to listen to your podcast a bit more to understand the fund of fund side as well, and how others are shifting around as the technology shifts, right? Because something becomes all of a sudden not just popular but also possible.
What type of geo focus do you have?
Yeah, in terms of geography, I think I said earlier it's the Baltics and Eastern Europe. And when I say Eastern Europe, I know like Slovakia is kind of, you look on the map and it's kind of mid Europe, but that's a focus. And why this? I think both in terms of like competitive advantage, it doesn't make sense for me to go and battle for deals in Berlin or even Stockholm. There's strong local ecosystem and investors, but also some sort of patriotism because I've seen how we built up the ecosystem here, and I want to take that experience and help to educate founders in Bratislava, for example, where they have a lead local investor, that give them a term sheet. And I'm not going to say this is a shit term sheet, but I'd rather say, okay, these are the deals you got or the terms you got, and this is what is the market average in the Baltics. So you get the comparison point, and you can decide what is important for enough for you to start negotiating on and what's okay. Good news, there was nothing weird in the Slovakian term sheet.
Maybe a follow-up question to your initial reflection on fund of funds and other more kind of institutionalized kind of LPs. What about, opening up Lemonade Stand to more family offices, right? Just generally speaking, in the sense of keeping this profile, but just having more diverse kind of a set of LPs. What are your considerations there and kind of pros and cons and thinking there for you?
It's definitely, again, something we're thinking about. I think what I've experienced now in the last year is that the solo GP model only stretches that far. Ultimately, you start making compromises either on the deal flow side, the due diligence side, or then post-investment support side. So if you start taking external money and growing the money under management, like organization building needs to not just follow, but actually lead. And that's something, kind of working on.
I'd love to dive more into that because that is incredibly transparent / honest / cool of you to say, because I
promised you that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it is rare that you hear the flip side of being a solo GP discussed that openly, and especially from someone who's running that model, right? So I'd love to ask you to dive a bit more into that. Where is it that you're really feeling that you're having to cut corners, and also where do you see the brink? So could you share with us a bit about? Is it because you're seeing that, how many deals are you doing? Because that shows a bit the capacity limit that you at least are seeing to the model.
The portfolio size right now is 40 startups, and then I said like 4 LP tickets as well. The LP tickets are fairly hands-off, although the local accelerator is occasionally asking me to mentor the startups a little bit as well. And I think that I started noticing that, okay, I need to start thinking more consciously where I'm spending my time, around 30 startups in portfolio. I think if you're a very hands-off angel, or there are a few funds in Europe that are kind of indexing the market and are very upfront that they don't do any post-investment help, then it can go further. But since I'm still trying to put my sort of background in marketing and growth on the table for the startups that I invest in, I've started making, I don't want to say cutting corners, but really being less active on new deal size. And one thing that has helped me is the narrowing of the focus myself. So I'm kind of more aware of what I'm looking for and not looking for. So the no's are coming much faster. I think it's disappointing for a lot of startups in the region because obviously the selection of local VCs isn't very big for them. But that's been necessary for me to continue the investment pace while maintaining the quality of help that I can provide to the portfolio.
I'm thinking here, so you're doing 150K tickets on average. I would think that means that you're also often not necessarily leading, right?
Never leading.
Do you really feel that you then owe, in quotation marks, that much value add?
So this is where the human psychology, I think, comes in. Maybe I don't know how to say no. Maybe I feel that there's a nugget where I can make the difference between startup really finding their groove and not. Maybe it's very egoistic of me to think that, but smart founders seem to want for help, and I've always made an agreement with them that it's on demand. They need to come and ask, but here's the the user manual for me. What are the topics they can ask about? I sometimes get the comment that no matter the sort of the percentage you own on the cap table, you're the highest value add investor we have, which makes me incredibly sad because it seems like the bar is very low. Since I'm not spending like a day a week with them. Yeah, so my message to all the founders always is like, investors are lazy, ask more from them. And founders actually miss an opportunity here as well when they do their hopefully monthly updates. I don't see very high quality asks for them, and I know they're struggling with something. So be as specific as you can. Put the investors on the spot, like call out names who help them and so forth.
There's a lot to be said on that topic, and I'm sure you have quite some thoughts and reflections yourself, which is on the founder's ability to extract value from the investor base, right? So you can't expect every single investor to be, waiting for you to do the update and then they're going to follow through with every single fucking thing you write in the small letters, right? It's about
For sure.
how you communicate, how, as you said, right, the quality of the asks. But I guess there's also a lot to be said around, because you said it's where the psychological part comes in. But the example you give is you get the founders saying that you're one of the most added value investors. Well, I don't think that's psychological. I think that's access, right? And that's thinking about the flywheel that comes out of that. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I hope so. Because sometimes it doesn't take a lot from me. Like they might come and ask a question and I don't know the answer for myself, but because I have a large enough portfolio, I could say, okay, these are the two founders, CTOs, the head of growth you need to talk to because they did the same thing or they win the same shit a year ago. So right now I'm just trying to get one CEO to put together like a small workshop for founders who are getting into the sort of 1 million ARR point, how to scale from 1 million to 10 million, because there are like a few founders in the portfolio who've done that now. So what are the accelerated learnings?
The most, should I call it the best solo GPs and best super angels I've kind of seemed to have come across have all had in common that their main value add is recruiting and network. Because that is scalable. That's quite scalable, right? Because it's just about linking two people, and you don't have to. You're not being asked for, a long session where we can then discuss the strategy going forward, and you really have to understand the context every time you get an ask. It's quite a lot easier to say, yeah, I know this guy. You should meet these guys.
Yeah. You get very good at making intros, right?
Exactly. And just to anyone listening in, I think I wrote an email to Siim saying, Siim, you have made the best intros for a long time. So thanks a million for those. And I think it was 3 or 4 or so that he made that all came through super interesting. So that was really cool.
On this topic of, the solo GP model only stretching so far, right? So obviously once faced with that reality, one has two options, either keep it and accept that or change it, right? So no longer being a solo GP. So on that possible route, is it like keeping your access long-term one of the main kind of considerations that you have in whether or not you should have another GP join? Because then you can't really, it's very hard to make sure that that level of service, so to speak, stays there.
I've been thinking here, what would be an interesting, maybe slightly different way to scale this? What if we could set up banana stand in Lithuania, where we find someone not quite like me, but who could set up a similar entity there that then builds its own access, own deal flow, and we start running a parallel track and then do the same in pick your next country or region. Because then we wouldn't necessarily get into this, I was here before, so I get most of the carry, all these things, especially because we're not operating as a real fund. So yeah, I'm trying to, if anyone has a great alternative take on this, not building a typical VC fund out of this.
You're doing the McDonald's model where you franchise the name, yeah, and then they own the real estate, right? So you own the GP, so fuck.
Yeah, probably can't be banana stand. There's a banana cap in the US, so need to come up with a new name.
Yeah. Siim, it's been super fun, and we're close to the end of the episode, and we always end with a quick fire round, and that's when I will ask a couple of quick answer questions, 30 to 60 second answer each. Are you ready?
Sure, go for it.
First question: what areas, technologies, or sectors excite you the most, but that you find people around you not getting that excited about?
Very boring. I was going to answer like AI and sustainability, and then everybody says the same. So, but the truth is that I spend a lot of time looking at boring solutions. So what are the actual business problems where machine learning can be applied to? I gave a couple of examples earlier. And then maybe one that isn't consensus yet, at least in this region, is the future of food. There's not enough deal flow here. So as I said, that's one of the LP investments that we made. One of the deals here sort of sparked me to this. I spent quite a bit of time sort of learning around this. But yeah, not enough deal flow, not enough expertise to really help the portfolio companies. So invest in a small fund that is putting our mind to work globally.
Second question, what are your top tips for emerging VCs across Europe who are now fundraising?
Yeah, I don't have any tips because fortunately we didn't have sadly we didn't have to fundraise. But if I think how startups and people stand out and what makes others pay attention, it's kind of simple. You need to find your voice. You need to say something controversial, have an opinion about something. And again, this is not just for GPs, but everyone. Do the repetitions. Again, like for the founders, it's pitch enough times to get enough feedback to know to get better. It's the same for GPs. And talk to the community. That was super helpful for me when I started out, just asking other both angels and VCs what were the mistakes they made. And then, of course, I went and made all the same mistakes, but still.
Third and final question, what is the most counterintuitive thing you've learned since you've been in venture?
Repeating from previous question, like this about making your own mistakes, what I'm seeing a lot of the founders is that they struggle with the same things. Although there's so much good material, written podcast, videos, presentations, so forth, where you should have all the knowledge in the world in the fingertips and all access to all the people, and everybody's still going and making the same mistakes. And I'm kind of hitting myself in frustration, like, why am I not able to help here? And the second thing is maybe getting into full-time investing. I was reading about the psychology of like the long cycles here and the FOMO and so forth. And while you intellectually recognize them, occasionally you do a gut check. Oh, actually, that deal, like I wasn't using just the brain. I was using maybe wrong parts of my psychology as well, making decisions. So yeah, battling with our own mind.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree with that. I can see why, and I think that anyone who is fair and honest would say now, sitting here in 2023, looking back and saying, there were some times that the deals weren't made purely out of my cognitive capacity. Siim, thanks so much for joining us today. It was amazing.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the European VC, the go-to podcast for everything European VC. If you love the show, share it with your friends and join our newsletter at eu.vc.